Yesterday on the show, we were talking about the RCMP's concern over whether or not drones could be used for terrorist purposes in order to commit crime. They have put together a group of people to study what sort of actions, what sort of laws might be needed in the future to deal with drones. And we learned today that the RCMP, on the other hand, would like to have a bunch more drones themselves. Jeremy Richler is here and Lori Goldstein. So, Lori, is this the kind of surveillance equipment modern law enforcement needs?
Well, I think it's like everything else. It's how is it used?
Yeah.
You could certainly see a legitimate purpose in terms of traffic situations. If they have a hostage situation, they want to get the best intelligence they can. If you have rioters, you may want to have a visual thing. But the problem becomes obviously mission creep. Do you start using it to on peaceful protesters because you want to intimidate them? You can have normally you have officers up in there. They'll have their zoom lenses and they're photographing the crowd. Well, now are you under surveillance just when you're doing normal democratic things out and about?
Well, you are anyway by so many cameras if you're in any kind of populated area.
I think realistically though the problem is that I think there are concerns about potential abuse that have to be addressed. The problem today is that once you're out and about in our society, you really have consented to having your privacy. From the bank machine to the street cameras to the parking lot security one. So there is that issue, but I think with the police force, you have to be particularly careful.
Well, yeah, you raised some very interesting points there. I mean, when you live in a society, we value our civil liberties, we cherish them, but in any society, there's never any extremes, so you're always going to consent to some intrusions. The question is, like you say, with the mission creep, at what point is the line crossed? I mean, they talk about using them in exigent circumstances, but then the situation becomes, are they going to use them, are the police going to use them when they feel there's a convenience for them? And then also there's the issue that the RCMP brought up themselves of terrorism, and that, so it's like anything else, that you have to strike a fine balance between upholding public safety, which is what society consents to, and the individual rights. And I think liberals and conservatives can agree, particularly libertarian conservatives, that the rights of the individual should prevail and that reasonable limits ought to be imposed on the use of this machinery.
Yeah, I think. I mean, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. That there are legitimate security concerns. You want our police forces to have the best possible tools they can have to fight terrorism. But we've seen in the past that if you after 9/11. A lot of things were done very sincerely to protect North America from another horrible terrorist attack. Yeah. But we also saw that civil liberties got burned up in that process. So the important thing is perspective.
Yeah, and it's there was even an incident, just having read one of the articles, where apparently it was very minor, but one of the drones landed near Angela Merkel when she was making an announcement, the Chancellor of Germany. So I mean, you don't want that to happen, and it almost makes. I remember there was a huge firestorm in Ontario when photo radar was imposed, and obviously Mike Harris got rid of it. I mean, this is a little bit more intrusive, arguably, than photo radar if not used properly. And you don't want it to be like that song by The Police: every breath you take, every step you take, some drone is watching you. I mean, that's not what we want, but if there are enhancements to public safety and security that can be utilized through this machinery, then it's not a zero sum. It's just we got to get the balance right.
Yeah. There's another practical consideration that has been raised, and it's been raised by Transport Canada, and that's we don't need more people flying things around in the air. Eventually, stuff's going to run into one another.
Well, look, you obviously would want. First of all, that's a legitimate concern. I mean, when you look at one thing like an RCMP request, my first thing wouldn't be that the guy's not going to know how to fly it, but when you have all kinds of companies, using these things, these things are in the air. Say, one lands close to a leader, everybody freaks out. Absolutely, there are practical problems. I mean, for me, I'm still waiting for my flying car. I was promised that in Popular Mechanics 50 years ago, and I'm quite disappointed.
So it wasn't just George Jetson; it was Popular Mechanics.
It was going to happen by now, and
Well, I'm worried about the police surveillance being knocked out of the sky by the drone that's bringing me a pizza. That's the thing.
Jerry, you might be aiming the drone that's bringing you pizza at the police.
Yeah, I'm perfectly willing to go get the pizza, to be honest with you. The Conservative government's overhaul of Canada's immigration system will hit a milestone. They are attempting here to make it quicker and easier for skilled labor, skilled individuals to come into the country. If you've already lined up a job, they'll make it much easier. You can apply, and once you get the get-go, be in within 6 months. You have any concern?
I think that the immigration program that the government has implemented does hit the right note in terms of we want skilled immigrants, we want people that are going to contribute to the workforce. However, I'm a bit concerned that we're losing that we need to strike a balance between obviously bringing in immigrants that bring economic credentials, but also having a focus on refugees and letting people in.
That's a different thing altogether.
I know, but I'm saying, like my grandparents, for example, came here in 1951, escaping the horrors of the Holocaust. They were young, they were capable, they were intelligent, but under this very mechanistic system with scorecards, I'm not saying they wouldn't have gotten in, but I'm not as confident. So my sense is that yes, I'm not going to say the government is on the wrong track. I think we want immigrants that are going to contribute to our society and contribute to our economy, but also have compassionate grounds and bring in those that are escaping horrors for a better life.
I always get disturbed, Laurie, by this argument that somehow we're not being welcoming to refugees. Economic immigrant claimants and refugees are two totally different categories.
It's totally true, but governments, both liberal and conservative, have for decades have problems getting both of those files right. There's a couple things here. One thing I'd remark upon is that when the Reform Party years ago talked about that the primary purpose of immigration ought to be the economic benefit of Canada,
right,
they were accused of racism. Now that's mainstream thinking. We all agree that there's an economic component. Having said that, I've been a reporter for almost 40 years, right? And when I was a young reporter, I was writing stories about the screwed up immigration system and the refugee system.
Yeah.
And I have heard government after government, liberal and conservative, liberal again and conservative, come up with the latest whiz-bang idea, we're going to get this all sorted out. My concern here, I agree with Jeremy, I think they're on the right track, but this places a tremendous, and we already have a point system, but this places a tremendous premium on computer-assigned numbers, on the key is, do you have a job or don't you have a job? And the idea that a government can claim it can almost perfectly match up a country's economic needs to its immigration, I don't think that's on. And Jerry makes a legitimate point. Most of our parents, I think, who all became productive citizens in Canada, law-abiding, contributing to the economy all their lives, would not have qualified under something like this because they wouldn't have a job waiting for them. So I think you have to be, I agree with the thrust. I think we just have to be careful that it's implemented properly.
Well, what they're also talking about, though, is people applying through what would effectively be a sort of a job bank, and that eventually down the road, hopefully not too long, they would allow employers to have access to that and try and hook the right person up with the right job. Refugees aside, different thing altogether. There's no harm at all in saying if we're going to bring people into the country, you're going to make sure they can support themselves.
And that's fair and legitimate, but as Laurie's pointing out, when you have a point system as rigid as this one is, I mean, obviously you need some sort of system when you're dealing with mass numbers. But then the problem is that individuals, all unique and all that bring talents of their own right, get treated overly mechanistically. I mean, it's a problem that we have for admissions for law schools and medical schools, where it's like your test was this, it wasn't that, so this person, and then when you're hoping to be orderly and fair, perhaps when you have too much reliance on such a program system, it becomes overly mechanistic. So to get to your answer is, my concern is that many who would contribute, we might be overlooking many that could obtain jobs because we have too rigid a system in place.
Well, that's always going to happen because we can't let in as many people as want to. And by the way, one more point. When my grandfather came here, maybe he wouldn't have qualified under the current system, but he wouldn't have gotten the support either that a person coming into this country gets today. Costs a lot of money if somebody doesn't have a job.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we all want a system that makes sense. Everybody knows it's a difficult file. I agree with you that there's a whole bunch of things on the refugee side that need to be better addressed. But, you know, I appreciate the government's trying to improve the system. It's easy to say to everything, no, 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 no. Having said that, and being generally supportive of it, I agree with some of the concerns Jeremy's raised. I do.
All right, a couple of energy issues coming up as Jeremy and Laurie will stay. And Ontario, because apparently we need them, is getting even more windmills. That's next on Straight Talk. We have spoken many times about the problems around the implementation of windmills for power in Ontario, whether or not they are effective in delivering power, and whether or not, in fact, it's been a fair and above-board process in the implementation of the Green Energy Act in Ontario. We were speaking of it yesterday. Laurie, this is a kind of a specialty for you. Now we learn that Ontario's Environmental Review Panel has given the go-ahead for the Grand Bend Wind wind farm, 40 turbines along the Lake Huron shoreline, $380 million. Did we need more of them?
Well, no, we have an energy surplus right now, and we don't need them. Also, wind and solar did not replace coal, which is the Ontario Liberal government's mantra. No, coal was over 20% of the system. Wind and solar right now and biomass are 4%. You don't replace 20% with 4%. What the government did was they upped their nuclear electricity production and their natural gas production, which they needed for the wind turbines anyway, because the wind turbines don't blow, when the wind doesn't blow the sun, and when the wind's too strong. Look, on this one, what I would say is, yeah, the Liberals have put in a legal process, and legally this has cleared this hurdle, and that's fine. But to me, the whole process just denies people natural justice. The first thing the Liberals did, Dalton McGuinty passed the Green Energy Act, took away any planning rights of local municipalities to have a say in wind turbines, solar. That, to me, that's not natural justice. What, suddenly municipalities have no say? And you see it, and I saw it in this developer, there's a certain smugness. They know they're going to win. They go into these hearings backed by the provincial government, right? They know it's a policy. The various bodies, including the courts, look at it and goes, well, there is a policy. They were democratically elected government. Away we go. But is this process been just? I don't think it's been just at all.
You know, Jeremy, Liberals love when they're trying to slow down a project to talk about getting social, what do they call it, a social contract, that you need to have buy-in from the community, unless it's windmills, in which case pretty much screw the local authorities.
Well, I mean, Lori, even though I respectfully disagree in part, Lori makes some very valid points here that, perhaps on issues of natural justice there have been flaws, but the mistake I would say that the opponents have made is that they've tried to make it based on charter arguments, based on Section 7, and I mean, as a lawyer, I can tell you that. But the thing is, that's a very it's a very strong uphill climb that's unlikely to win. And the thing is, the medical examiner found both at the tribunal and was upheld at the divisional court that the links between illness from the windmills were not established with sufficiency to show that there was a breach. So the thing is, what
about the fact that they actually aren't efficient and we're overpaying for the power? It's just not good for Ontario.
Well, I would argue that although it can't replace coal, we need to move in this direction because there's a serious environmental threat. And although I don't think wind and solar energy can replace coal, we need to move in this direction. And that the opponents should be framing their arguments more along the lines that Lori's doing rather than to using mechanisms. And I argued mechanisms such as the charter and judicial activism, which should ordinarily be anathema to conservatives, and try a different tack. I mean, we're talking about it here.
But I think, to be fair, that these farmers who brought forth that charter argument did so because reason and common sense wasn't working.
Look, to me, in this whole process, the fix is in. Anybody who's examined this process and has I've been reporting on it for years now, knows that these families, they don't have resources. First of all, what happens is the wind power people come in, they go and make deals with certain lessees, right? The city council can do nothing about it. In this case, the city council has declared itself an unwilling host. That has had no impact either. Basically, these are just everyday people who are getting overrun by a juggernaut. And in terms of what the arguments are, I don't think any argument's going to work because. And in fairness to Winna, they won an election on this. Everybody knew about the Gasplat scandal in 2000. They got a 2014 vote. They got another majority government. It wasn't a sneak attack. So I don't expect the Liberals to change course on this. But it's a bad deal.
But I hate that when 62% of the people voted against them. They only won it because of the fact that we have a multi-party system and they bought off all of the people who work for the government.
Yeah.
So
No, I don't.
We were done in. It's not.
But that's democracy.
But it's a horrible misuse of democracy.
Well, the only other argument I'd make, and again, I don't want to make it about another government, but let's not pretend that this is the only government that perhaps didn't listen to the concerns of ordinary citizens. I mean, now you have, as we will transition with oil and gas projects, a duty to consult with First Nations, which Stephen Harper has been criticized for not doing enough of. So I take the point that there probably should have and ought to have been greater consultation, and that there's a certain, I don't want to say a certain fix, but that, the landowners are going to rightly feel that this is unfair. But let's not pretend that this is particular to this project. It's unfortunate that it happens all too often, but
I said to you yesterday, when you say other people do it too, you've lost the argument. That's like telling your mother, well, Bobby does it.
I'm not saying that it makes it right. I'm just saying that when you have mass scale projects across sectors and across industries, you're often going to have a juggernaut of the business juggernaut against ordinary citizens, which ironically, traditionally, the left is known to uphold. And I'm not saying any of this is right, but that it's unfortunate. But we do live in a society where people do have recourse to the courts. Yeah. Like I said, the charter I never felt would be effective, but certainly there's the court of public opinion, and the fight isn't all lost.
This one isn't complicated. The problem here is that Ontario's put the setbacks too low. If you go and look at Europe, 500 meters, 550 meters, that's very on the low end. If you put these things, if you had a 1 kilometer setback, 1.5 as they do in many European countries, all of this would disappear.
Well, the argument about health would disappear. The argument of the inefficiency of it all would not.
No, but we were talking specifically here about the Environmental Review Tribunal rejecting an appeal by the families. And so in this case, I'd say, look, you put the things too close. Everybody who's studied this knows that. The issue of whether there are causal health things or not, look, what annoys you is what annoys you, right? That's the way it is.
That's right.
Some people are annoyed by certain things. A lot of people went into the country, they wanted to have quiet lives. They're getting these 30-story things put on them, as opposed to like Toronto, where in downtown Toronto, and I love the Toronto Liberals who, oh, well, these people are just NIMBYs and they don't care. But in downtown Toronto, you want to put a porch on the back of your house. You have to go through 37 committees of adjustment.
And you're right. The only thing I'll say is the Charter upholds fundamental rights. There's no NIMBY rights section in the Charter, which is what this in a way comes down to.
TransCanada chief slams ludicrous arguments by Energy East opponents. Can you explain that to us?
Well, this is fossil fuel giants fighting with each other, right?
Okay.
Right? And that's really, when we get into the issue of oil and energy and the use of, you've got to remember that sure, there are environmental groups that have agendas and all that, but the gas industry is up against the oil industry. The oil industry is up against the coal industry, and they all fight each other, and they all try to cloak themselves in, we're the righteous people trying to give you the best deal for the most reliable energy. So skepticism is called for. In this one, look, there's a fight. Energy East wants to be able to move, the Energy East pipeline is so that TransCanada, which is also doing the Keystone one, wants to be able to move energy from the oil sands out to the East Coast, right?
Seems a reasonable goal.
And they're running into a lot of other companies that are competitors who go, oh no, all kinds of terrible things are going to happen if you do that. And he's expressing his frustration. It's not what I would have done if I was trying to get a pipeline through, but he's the CEO. He presumably knows what he's doing.
Well, that's the point. I mean, the thing is, having done some legal work on competition matters, price fixing or adverse effects on prices towards competitors is always going to be a concern. So for competitors to be saying that they have concerns about this is, as we'd say, fair game, even if it's exaggerated. However, I do agree that to say that it's quote unquote ludicrous from an image or brand management perspective is not the way to go. The perception when you make those kind of, I don't want to say flippant remarks, but dismissive remarks is that, looks a little smug, it looks perhaps a little arrogant. So I take his point and his frustration. You're trying to do something which the country essentially needs, but in terms of image and brand management, I would have said that's not how you do it.
Yeah.
All right, so if the CEO...
tribunals and courts don't like to hear when the case comes before them that one of the side is called the other side ludicrous. They just don't. And in other words, you fight it out at the appropriate
body.
Deference
and respect, and that doesn't show it.
Yeah.
Well, does this indicate maybe that he thinks he's going to win, so it doesn't matter?
I think, if I had to guess, it would be that he's fairly confident. But all these things take, they take realm in the energy and the practical realm, but they take place in the political realm as well and the legal realm. And to me, if you have a good case, you state it calmly. You don't use words that are going to be flashpoints for your opponents to rally around. You just don't.
Yeah, but I think what often happens is people make remarks in the heat of the moment, and you can't stage manage everything you say. Like, do I think it was the right thing to say? Absolutely not. Yeah. It shows a certain...
And we don't know what he was reacting to.
Yeah.
Maybe he was reacting to over-the-top statements.
But, sometimes, you say something and it's for the record, and then the next thing, guess what? It's in the newspapers, and that's not what you wanted, but that's what happens. I mean,
media.
Is he going to need to, hire image relations companies to fix this? Probably not, but yeah, I don't think it was the way to go either.
All right, I appreciate both of you. Thanks very much. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Same to you.